morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am Tamara Ecker, Managing Director of British American Business, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back from summer holidays into our first virtual fall program of the season. For those of you who are not familiar with British American Business, we are the trade association exclusively supporting companies with operations in the US and UK markets, and working to make that trade corridor even more vibrant and easier to navigate. We run over 120 meetings, events, programs per year, and cover a range of themes impacting our member companies, with DEI, frankly, at the front and center. Today, we are going to discuss how organizations hire, accommodate, and support those with disabilities in the workplace. We may not get it all right today, but the more we can bring this topic to the forefront, the more progress we can make. Before we jump in, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind everyone that this event is part of BAB's STIR series, discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion against a backdrop of US and UK business. It's a series built in partnership with our members to address these cross-cutting issues, regardless of sector, geography, or company size. This program is made possible with thanks to our annual STIR sponsors, who are ACCA, Broadridge, EY, Fitch Ratings, and National Grid. Now, to help us tackle this topic and lead us through today's discussion, we are lucky to be joined by Jan Power, CEO and founder of TLC Lions. Through his own personal life experiences, Jan found that storytelling makes workplaces more emotionally inviting, places where you feel safe, trust those around you, and where teams feel more like second families. Since launching TLC Lions, Jan and his team have supported over 300 global organizations and reached more than 2 million people across the world. So, Jan, it's a pleasure to have you, and over to you.
Wonderful. Well, Tamara, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for inviting me to be here today. And everybody, I hope you're having a good morning, good afternoon so far, and welcome to this very special session on such an important topic around disability. Now, as Tamara mentioned, my name is Gyan Power, and for those who are joining the call, I'm a mixed white Asian man with dark hair and wearing a white t-shirt with a cream blazer. And today, as Tamara mentioned, I am the CEO and the founder of TLC Lions, really on a mission to humanize the working world. So I think we really do need workplaces and society to be more human now than ever before. Now, this session today is about such an important topic. And of course, it's on embracing disability and empowering others. Now, I spend most of my days actually in the depths of people's stories. And I'm really excited that today we're going to hear two personal stories and views, which ultimately it's stories that shape our ways of thinking and can really make a difference. And I hope today there'll be many practical tips that you can take into your organization too. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into things today. From a timing perspective, we're going to go into a discussion for around 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A as well. When we go into the Q&A, please feel free to use the raise hand function that's at the bottom of the screen, and I'll come to you for questions when the time is right too. I kindly ask if it's okay just to stay muted when we're not asking questions. It's just easier for everybody when we're going through the discussion. And of course, today's session is being recorded if you haven't already noticed, for anybody who might need it on demand as well. Now, that's a little bit of housekeeping, and so I want to get into things a little bit more today. But before we do, I just want to set the stage for this really important topic, because there's over 1 billion people around the world who live with a disability. In fact, when we're talking about DE&I, those with a disability are the largest minority group in the world. And for me, there's so much more to be done. In a world where I think talk is cheap, it is about action. And I hope after today, you'll take some actions away into your organization that will help drive change together. Now, that's enough from me, because today I really want to go into the stories and insights from our two incredible panelists. Today, we're joined firstly by Crosby Cromwell, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Cephable, and also from Steve Ingham, who's the former CEO of Page Group. Now, a warm welcome to you both. And before we go into the questions today, I'd love to just hand over to maybe do a bit of an introduction. Let us know who you are, a little bit about yourself. And Crosby, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you, Jean. What a lovely opening to this conversation. I think this is my second time with the network, and I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. So for a quick audio description, I am a white woman with long reddish hair coming to you from my apartment in Washington, D.C. I never say my age. My Southern American grandmother would kill me if I did. I'm a person who identifies as having a disability, coming to it through mental health, both anxiety disorder and cyclical depression. I've had my own journey, my own story. I've worked in this space for 20-ish years, and nothing fulfills my passion and my profession more than to advance the lives and the opportunities of people with disabilities, especially in business. I believe so deeply in the power of business to create change. I believe in disability as a profit center. We're going to talk about all of these things. I'm honored to be in this conversation along with Steve. I most recently was a part of an organization called the Valuable 500, which many of you may be familiar with or be a part of, that is driving change globally out of the UK. So, we can get started from there, Gian. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. And I think something you said there was businesses can drive change. And hopefully that's something that at the end of today's session, we can all come together to collectively do that. Now, Steve, I'll hand over to you if I can. A little introduction to get to know you a bit more.
Thank you. Well, likewise, for audio purposes, I'll describe myself. I'm a white male with no hair. And I guess I probably was 6'4", but now I'm 4'6", so that's confused you because I'm in a wheelchair permanently. I'm wearing a bright blue summer shirt because I'm actually calling you from near Nice in the south of France, on the verge of going to a couple of rugby matches this weekend. So it's almost evening here. So if you see me with a glass of rosé, don't be offended, please. I haven't got a problem, I don't think. So to introduce myself, as it was said at the beginning, I work for a company called Page Group. Page Group are one of the world's leading recruitment companies, and I joined them 38 years ago, and I was there 37 and a half years, joining when they were about 200 people, and I left them when they were almost 10,000 people. I joined them when they were in 3 countries, and I left them when they were in 37. And I was very lucky to be their CEO for 17 years. And we're a FTSE 200 company, so we're in the top 200 quoted companies in the UK. So to survive as a CEO, that's for 17 years, that's not bad. And I guess a lot changed for me. I'd had an agenda while I was CEO to really drive DE&I within Page, and I'd like to think we led the way from a lot of certainly our industry and many of our clients, frankly. And we'd focus on all aspects of diversity, and it was just as well for me because 4 years ago I had a catastrophic skiing accident. I very nearly died. I was on my own in a river in the Alps. So if for any of you that are skiers, that's how it happened, if you're wondering. And yeah, it wasn't good. I broke my spine. And again, for those of you sort of who understand a little bit about this, T10, T11. So put bluntly, just below the belly button, I can't feel anything. That's left me permanently in a wheelchair. But as several of you on this call, I think, would know, I was back at work fairly quickly. And it was, I think, the work that we'd done on EDI that probably meant I could come back as a CEO and be accepted. Without going into too much detail, we had 3 out of 4 record years following that accident in my role as CEO. And I guess my final task was to make sure that I retired at the top. So I stepped away at the end of last year. And obviously the economies have been hit a little bit since then, but I'm glad to see they're still doing very well.
Well, Steve, thank you so well, firstly, for being here today and sharing your story, because as I shared, it's these personal stories that I know we're going to touch upon throughout today that really make the difference. Now, before we get into kind of more on the personal side, I do want to take a bit of a step back, because the topic we're talking about today around disability, whilst it's so important, and Crosby, I'm going to come to you firstly on this one. Compliance is important, having the right policies in place. Of course, this is so important, whether you're a small company or a large multinational. But if the company itself doesn't have a culture that's inclusive, kind of, you could argue, what's the point if nobody's adhering to these policies? So my question to you really is, how can an organization change their mindset to be more proactive in creating a more inclusive culture? Quite a big question for you there, but I think it's where we've got to start.
Yeah, no, and I come into this as a fan, also excited to hear Steve's answer to this question. But truly, I think it's first about stepping back and understanding the world that we live in. You started with saying it's 1.3 billion, it's 16% of the world's population. Disability already lives inside your workforce. I don't care who is on this call. If you don't think it's visible in your workforce and you're thinking disability is not there, 80% of all disabilities are actually invisible or hidden. If you think about neurodiversity, ADHD, the rise of an understanding of autism and spectrum disorders, all of those across the board, diabetes, we could go on with how disability lives inside of your employee base already. And I think it's understanding the productivity that you can unleash when you harness allowing people to live their authentic selves, their authentic stories, hiring that way, building a culture that accepts and allows individuals to work that way. We saw it across COVID as industries, as companies started to look at their workplace flexibility, started to look at their policies in a way that was about productivity, regardless of disability or not. To me, that's how you can start to unleash a culture that is accepting and innovating for all.
But on that one, then I'm going to bring Steve in. As you mentioned there, it can help with productivity if you actually get to know your people on a human level and they feel comfortable to disclose their disability. Steve, how do you create that culture?
Yeah, I mean, for a start, it's not going to happen overnight. You've got to work at this for a long time. You've got to set the stall out right at the beginning. Yes, you can have the framework and you can have the governance and all of that sort of stuff. But right from day one, everyone needs to talk the language and be committed to it. And that means right from the very top. And all of your leaders need to be thinking, at the same time, in the same way. And that's really, really important. And you can do things to ensure that. You can set targets, you can even link them to reward and all sorts of things, but you've got to get people really believing that it's a positive thing for the business. We at Page have always suffered from losing good people, as every company does. And, at certain times of the economy, that can heighten and then lower and so on. It's really important to make sure people are enjoying their work, feel included, feel comfortable, can be themselves and not hiding some elements of themselves that makes it uncomfortable for them to be at work. And that's crazy. And I think one of the things that it's really important for me to put across, I've done a lot of writing about what happened to me. There was only one CEO in the FTSE 200 that declared a disability. I've met a lot of people with a disability who openly talk about their disability, either hidden typically or very visible because they're in a wheelchair or something like that. I am amazed at the quality of those people. I mean, so many people look through a lens which thinks of disability as a weakness. It's really not. I'm on the board of the British Paralympic Association. The CEO there, and he won't mind me saying this, is blind. I mean, when I'm sat at lunch and he says, I've suddenly realized I'm late for a meeting, will you two guys pay the bill? And he runs out of a restaurant in the middle of London with nothing more than a white stick, totally blind. I mean, we all know what London's like. It's like New York. It's crazy. The courage, the resilience, the innovative skills that are offered, all of these different things. I look at disability as a positive, not a weakness, a strength. And that's what companies like Page, like all of our companies, need in their workforce. And if they feel comfortable, they'll stay committed and that will help productivity. It really is as simple as that.
And if people are on the line perhaps thinking, Steve, I'm with you, I agree with you, but the leaders at the top of my company, they just don't seem to get it. What would you say to them if we wanted them to challenge upwards in their organization? How could they go about broaching this topic?
Yeah, I mean, leaders like that do need to change, sadly, and so they will. And ultimately, we saw this at Page all of the time. And, it's our job to interview people all day, every day. That's what we do. and I try to think over 37 years how many people I've interviewed. The reality is we can always hide behind as leaders why people are leaving our organization. Oh, it's our industry, or it's a poor location, or whatever it is. We don't pay enough, but we can't pay more, or whatever it is. But I can promise you the real reasons that people are leaving organizations is because they don't enjoy where they're working. They don't feel included, and they don't appreciate the culture of that organization. So good leaders should change, and they need to get that message from other leaders. And yes, they do need to get it in a constructive way from their own people. And that means probably being brave when people are resigning as well, and being honest about why they're leaving and saying, I didn't feel comfortable here. Yes, I have got a disability, or I'm gay, or I'm this, or I'm that, and I didn't feel included. So I'm going to find a place, and I think I have, where I will. And I can work harder and be more committed and more loyal. Sorry, I'm on my bike. And rather than hiding back perhaps some of those other reasons they leave.
Mm.
Well, I think it's so important as well. You mentioned the 30 plus years that you were at PageGroup, and you've seen the world change so much. And today we're living in a world of social media, of technology, where our reputation of our companies is not just, what's spoken about at an annual dinner or what's written about in the newspaper. It's a live, real-time reputation. So if companies get this wrong, people are vocal and they speak out about it, right? And Crosby, just bring you in on that, because throw the question again, if people are on the line, they think, gosh, Gian, Crosby, Steve, I'm with you, I hear you, I'm just a bit scared to challenge upwards, I don't know what to do. What would you say to them to give them a bit of courage now?
It's a hard question, because I think we need to refer back to what Steve said. It's so important that I think so much of the truth of the employee experience can be found in the exit interview. And it really is incumbent upon, look, I've been doing this, specifically disability in the corporate sphere, for 20-ish years, and we are at a tipping point. And if companies don't figure this out, they're going to be behind from a competitive edge perspective. And so I think for the first time, we are starting to see the tipping point of data. There has been a data dearth when it comes to disability to prove profitability, to prove the employee base, to prove it as a market share of it as a customer center, but it's starting to be there. And I think the employees who are using their voices, whether that be DEI leaders, ERG leaders, executives that have a passion for this, we now have data backing that is helping to tell that story. And I think that's imperative as we take it to CEOs, as we take it to the leaders, of the why of all this. I mean, if you think about the accessibility of websites and how that improves the user experience, regardless of disability or not. If you think about the readability of your communications, and there's been studies done out of Stanford that when you have a higher readability level, so easier to read, which can be geared to folks with certain disabilities, consumers, customers, anyone can read twice as fast with or without a disability. So you have consumers, you have your stakeholders moving through your information at a greater rate of speed. It's those kind of things that I think employees can arm themselves with as they tell the story internally. And then I would lastly point to organizations like the Valuable 500, like Disability:IN. There is a turning tide with major multinationals. PageGroup was one of those, stepping forward to say, we're committed to this. And if you're not one of those companies, then you're getting left behind.
But it's on that note, because you started mentioning there about the user experience, websites, online, and I'm going to bring this onto the physical workplace first, and then I want to go digital, because I think, and just to break this down for everybody, it was about 3 weeks ago, I was going for dinner with somebody, a friend of mine who's a wheelchair user, and it was on me to organize the dinner. So I'm going onto the website, and it's remarkable how many I started looking at, not accessible, not accessible. And it starts to make you empathize with somebody else. They think, wow, like there were small changes that these companies could have made to make it accessible, never mind employees, to customers. To your point, they're losing out on customers because of this. So what more can organizations do to make, I suppose, the physical workspaces more accessible and user-friendly for employees and customers? Steve, I'll come to you first, and excuse the helicopter going over London.
Okay, can't hear it actually, but no, I totally agree with you, and I'd echo the words you've just said as well, which are, there's a human reason for arguing for it, but there's a commercial and economic one as well. And to some leaders, you're probably going to have to lean on the economic one more than you can lean on the human one. And that's in itself is not really acceptable, because I managed nearly 10,000 people, but the average age of those people was vastly different from my age. That's the reality. And you've got to be thinking, I am leading them, not leading people like me. So I've got to appreciate the way they look on life. And it's fair to say things have changed in the last 30 years, as you quite rightly said. So you've got to think that way. And you know, whenever you have an office fit out every 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, depending on which part of the world you're in and how long leases are and all the rest of it, you've got a real opportunity here to remove any barriers to make sure that your offices aren't the reason why you're not inclusive. That would be silly. So the reality is you can just do that. It's not going to cost you a huge amount. And there are great companies out there who do nothing other than help guide you and guide your architects or your office plans, or whatever they're called, to basically get it right, like Motion Spot and so on. And they'll work with big companies, and they'll say, right, for the neurodivergent, the hard of sight, that all of the different issues that people might have, and actually being in a wheelchair is one of the simpler ones, they will give advice to make sure that that's right. Bright lights, dull lights, quiet rooms, noisy rooms, whatever it is, to make sure that the room, the physical aspects of your business are not the reason for you to be inclusive. And then you've got to start going beyond the physical. But that's as we would say, a schoolboy error if you're getting that wrong, particularly at the time of an office fit out. And I agree with you on businesses. And you were lucky to find websites that actually clearly mark whether a restaurant's inaccessible or not, because sadly, it usually requires a phone call, which of course these days is really difficult because you get an answering machine, et cetera, and everyone called you back. That would be remarkable. And I think we've got to, again, call it out, like we were talking about employees calling it out in companies. I really believe they should. And my actually daughter gave an example of calling it out today, literally, and it was around gender. Because they were about to x-ray a horse, and the male vet said, so is everyone here anyone pregnant? Well, there was only one woman in the room, and unfortunately she retorted and said the only ones that look pregnant in this room are the 3 males. But really it's inappropriate language in the first place, and something has to be said, and that's got to be called out. But it's got to be called out in society as well as in companies. And that's absolutely key. In restaurants and so on, why haven't they removed one table to make an accessible loo? Why going to an Ivy restaurant do I have to go down the road, down the high street, down a side road, and go to the toilet in the chicken shop? That happens in London. It happens around the world, and it's inaccessible, and it's going to knock the confidence of young disabled people, et cetera, et cetera. It's wrong, and we have to say something.
Well, I think especially when you go back to how, Crosby, you started this, which is 1.3 billion people in the world, which is the talent pool at the end of the day. So if they're the largest minority group, who are your prospective talent pool, and you're not catering for them.
At a time of talent shortage.
Yeah. Crosby, anything to add on this before I'm taking this off in many directions?
No, I think something that Steve said is so right on about so many organizations, so many companies do this and are here to be experts in this space so that you don't have to. And I think part of it, I know we may have come in with some strong statements about tipping point, business imperative, but I also think it's about being okay and honest with where you are in this journey right now as a company, as a business, and saying this is the point and we can improve and get better, and finding the right partners to create a safe space for you in that improvement, in that journey, because they are here to do that. And there should be, you started it off so well, there should be space and grace to figure this out. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to get comfortable with some of the uncomfortable, and all of that is okay. So I think it is about finding your point in the journey, understanding the why of all this. And the only wrong thing is to do nothing.
Oh, thank you. And I think, as you say, the only wrong thing is to do nothing, not to act. Now, Crosby, earlier you mentioned around indexes, and I have to ask you a question that might be deemed a little bit provocative, but I have to go there. Now, there's a lot to be said about indexes and being really helpful for organizations. If somebody features in an index, perhaps it's a stamp of approval, and for a prospective candidate to join, it gives you a sense of understanding they understand this, they take this seriously. Question: have companies gone too far where now they're so good at playing and preparing for the exam just to get into the index, but the culture itself isn't that inclusive? I say that because I interviewed Goldman recently over in New York, who said that X number of indexes they've pulled out of. They don't get involved because companies are just getting ready to pass the test. Is that the case or not? I'm all ears.
It's a complicated conversation. I think the good thing about the indices is that they start the conversation and they pull executives, they pull leaders in a way that maybe hasn't happened in the past around disability. I think we have to look at them with a grain of salt as a point in time score on a sheet of paper. And sometimes that's just what it is. It's what lives on paper and not what breathes and moves and buys and sells as a part of your organization. And so if you take it as one part, one piece of a holistic look of disability inclusion and accessibility, there you go. If you look at it as the whole and say we have 100%, we're done, then you're in trouble. And I think there's a rising tide of voices of disability activists and advocates who are leading a new tranche of influencers and rising leaders in the disability space who have a bigger and bigger problem with the indices as a barometer for truth. And so I just think it's about companies understanding this is a layered, complex, multi-narrative, multi-activity process.
Steve, before we move on, any thoughts on the indices and being as part of them?
Look, I chair, one of my roles now is to chair the Business Disability Forum. And of course, people qualify or don't to get certain accreditations for their accessibility in the workplace and for their products and so on. Look, it's not about collecting badges, it's walking the talk. And put bluntly, we can all talk a good game, but it's, what game are we actually playing? And that's really, really important. When I say that, I think one of the most powerful things, we haven't completely touched on it, I had no choice because I was in a wheelchair, so my disability is very visible. But the power of leaders coming out and talking about something. The reality is that there are about 800 in the top 100 companies in the UK. You can multiply that by 2 to 1,600 main board directors of the FTSE 200. You cannot tell me that there are only 2 or 3 of us that are disabled. So what we need is more of them to come out and talk about their disability. It's something that we did at Page before my injury. We had leaders around the world talking about their disability. We'd had the same for LGBTQ and so on. And it is really, really powerful. They came out and talked about issues that they had, depression, addiction, all sorts of different things. But they talked about it, and that instantly made a lot of people feel very much more inclusive and safe to be able to talk about their own. And I think that's what we really ought to try to persuade more and more people to do, because that is one of the most powerful things. You can see people then really walking the talk.
Well, it's true, and I know that, as you say, not to get all scientific on us, but because I love storytelling, when somebody shares actually what is going on in the brain of the listener is they're feeling acceptance, they're feeling open, and then they're starting to mirror that person, and that's going to create the right culture. But let's say, and I know some of my questions here are getting a bit tricky, but I just love the openness here. We're talking about leaders there disclosing and being open, which that's what we need more of to create the right culture. What would you say, Steve, I'll come to you first and then to Crosby on this. If people with disabilities are wondering how or when or whether to disclose their disability, perhaps during the interview process, I touch on that deliberately because of your experience. Somebody's in an interview, shall I bring it up? Shall I not?
It's a really difficult one. And what I heard, which was quite alarming, is that a very high percentage of people who are disabled at university are actually advised by their career advisory office to not declare it. What that would tell me if I was a 21-year-old about to embark on my career, which is going to be my next potential 40 years, is don't tell them because they'll obviously reject you. Well, that's sort of giving me this fear. Well, if they're going to reject me because they've read it on paper, well, how are they going to feel when I show up in a wheelchair or with a Labrador or whatever it is? And then what can I say? You know, or maybe I won't even be able to get into their offices or whatever. So, or the interview process could trip me up anyway, because it's a verbal reasoning one which I have to read and I can't see, or whatever, you know, unbelievable. I mean, it's difficult enough getting that first job, second job, third job anyway, without throwing these things. I think you have to be open. And I would say that you've got to be upfront about it. And you've got to hope that the sort of organization you want to join anyway would embrace that. However, I was on a junior board the other day of WizKids, and this is a charity in the UK that supports young people and gets them wheelchairs so they can be mobile and they can go to normal schools and get educated and so on. And this young board are graduates, or they're certainly at university. And I talked to them about this, and they said it's really, really difficult. The more open they are, the more they feel they're getting rejected. So it's a very, very fine balance. And so I think the final answer, which I would give, wouldn't I, even though I don't work there anymore, is you've probably got to find a middle person, a middle company that would actually represent you and really try to make sure that's overcome to get them interviews and so on. Because otherwise, for a 21-year-old out there in the wide world with a disability, applying and getting rejected, it doesn't take a lot for your confidence to be severely knocked.
So challenging, as you say, if you're being told that from your career advisors who are supposed to boost you up, they're telling you to hide everything whilst we're here trying to do the opposite. And Crosby, any thoughts on that? What would you say to them if somebody's like, shall I disclose, shall I not?
Steve said it, it's so incredibly complex, and that is not, it's incredibly common for individuals with disabilities to be taught to not disclose, especially as they go into the workplace. It's a part of why it's so beholden upon companies to get better at this, especially at the hiring and recruitment phase, to ask if any accommodations are. Why would I disclose in some cases if I don't know that this company is even friendly or understanding of disability? So putting those processes into the hiring components, asking if there are accommodations needed in the recruitment phase, looking at, again, at the accessibility of your hiring tools. So maybe your main website is accessible or inclusive, but as soon as you click to the actual job description or being able to fill in the application, it's no longer accessible. It's going through those processes and understanding the talent pool that you're trying to attract and making sure that you are vocal in your representation, both in your words and in your imagery of disability. But for individuals with disabilities, it really is a personal and a individual decision on how and when they disclose. I mean, my hope is that we build a world where it's completely a part of your identity and you're able to go in. But I know that that's a process, a journey, and a road that we're on.
It is, and I think it just takes, that's why it's great we're speaking not just about workplaces, but society and cultural norms need to change in order to change the dialogue so people see their disability as a strength, to your point, the way we started, and as a superpower, and employers to see that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I also say it also is a privilege in some ways of part of the disability community where I may not raise my hand and disclose, but someone like Steve, who is a chair user, is going to have to. And so it's beholden on the 80% of us with invisible or hidden disabilities to start to be more vocal about what we need in the workplace as well. I think it's those who don't raise their hand who in some ways make it harder on all. That's a little bit controversial, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well, no, it's on that. I'm going to weave into something else that's on my mind, because we're talking about people being vocal and putting themselves out there, especially the 80%, as you say, if it's not visible. Let's look at ERGs, employee resource groups, networks that companies have. Do you find them helpful, especially when it comes to advocating for and making a stance and raising the voice of those with a disability? If so, why do you think they're helpful having ERGs? Crosby, I'll come to you and then maybe to Steve on this.
Big believer. I think it's incredibly helpful to have ERGs unless you are putting all of the responsibility on the shoulders of those employees to create the change inside the company. And that too often happens. You have to have executive sponsorship. You have to have leadership buy-in. Their voice has to be heard if you're going to create a space for them to collaborate to try to drive change. If there's no outlet for that, you'll just end up creating frustration. I hear it over and over in our conversations with companies of the frustration of key ERG leaders. But I think it creates synergies and an opportunity to create change around disability inclusion from ERGs.
Mm. Got it. And on the ERGs, sorry, just before I come over to Steve, Crosby, let's say there's people on the line right now who are saying, look, I hear you, Crosby, we need an ERG, but I don't really know where to start. What would you say to them? Would they go and find the exec sponsor? What should they do?
There is an organization out of the UK called Purple Space that this is all they do day in and day out. It is their bread and butter, is to help build disability ERGs and leaders. Take a look at their website, their resources. Again, that's Purple Space. But 100%, I think you need to know who your executive sponsors will be in this conversation. Hopefully, he, she, or they have an attachment to disability either through their own personal story or through a connection. If not, they have a passion to help drive this internally and to understand your employee base that will help, step forward to get this started. And then, like Steve said earlier, find the right partners externally, the disability experts who do this, like a Purple Space. Thank you for putting that in the chat to get that formulated.
Got it. And then Steve, weaving on to you on the exec sponsors there. The ERG's been formed, they've got an exec sponsor, he or she's put their name on it, loud and proud, and it's there on the emails and the intranet. What's the expectation of this exec sponsor? What do we want them to do to help the ERG?
Well, actually, give them a voice, I think is the main thing. Look, I think as well, it's fair to say, and disability is very complex because it comes in all shapes and sizes and variations and so on, greater, lesser, whatever. And I think that's also one of the reasons, if I was trying to justify it in any way, that people have been slow on the uptake because they fear it. And so the responsibility, I think, of the ERGs, and I do think there's a very powerful reverse mentoring opportunity as well in most companies to just educate. We had somebody in our main office in London working. He was a tetraplegic and, young guy. We'd recruited him in to work across a number of different functions. And he wasn't right for us and he didn't want to work for us, but we placed him. But the education that the employees got through the year he was working with us was unbelievable. And, he may not have been able to move his arms in the way that I can, or his hands and with the dexterity I can, or whatever. But he could do a fantastic job, as good as anyone else. And what everyone saw as he did that job was the courage, the resilience, the commitment, and everything else he had. And it's that chicken and egg, isn't it? So we've got to use the storytelling within the ERG as well as use the voice of the sponsor to try and unlock this mystery of disability.
Powerful. And I think that's it from every story. There are such rich learnings. And again, I am that person who talks stories all day in, day out. But from every story, there's an opportunity to learn. I could sit down with anybody on this call of all 60 plus people and hear your life experience, and you will open up my eyes to something different to, change my workplace. So I think we can't underestimate the power of stories. Now, I've got a final question before we go into the audience Q&A, just as a reminder to everybody on the line in about 2 minutes, I'll come to questions and we'll use that raise hand function as well. So I'll be coming there in a moment, but we touched upon it briefly about the economic side of things and customer facing. So we've spoken a lot about employee facing, but looking at the corporate value chain. And Steve, I wanted to ask you this first of, how should disability inclusion be integrated, whether that's into product design, app design, all the way through to how we talk to customers?
Well, that's exactly right, isn't it? I was speaking at an event recently, and I said, naturally, as you do a bit of research, don't you? And so I went on their website to make sure I understood what they do, etc., etc. There was just nothing on there that said that they were really into the subject of DE&I, nothing at all. And I'm talking about perhaps the first part of DE&I that a lot of people focused on gender. I couldn't find a woman on their site. There was photographs everywhere of pictures and so on. So, you really do need to get it right from the beginning when, somebody's doing research. Would I want to work for that company that happens to be at the end of my road? I'll just look them up on the website and do some initial research, right the way through to the application process, as you say, going on their website to buy products. You know, the products themselves, it literally just covers the whole area. And we do need people to think in that way. So, you know, the offices, simple bit, get people to advise you on the practicalities of that. But then you really need to look at the whole thing. Economically, that will improve the business. You'll, you know, in a case of recruitment, you'll be attracting more candidates. You'll be welcoming them through your doors for an interview because, again, we're accessible in terms of being able to interview different types of disability and so on. Same with the clients that we represent, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you've really got to think of every single aspect.
It's incredibly important. And Crosby, anything to add on Steve's points there, just when we're looking at customer facing and the importance of it, anything we can think about?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's such a layer that we could have a whole conversation just about the market share and customization of all of this. In that, again, let's state 1.3 billion. It's why I joined Steffable, the assistive tech company that I'm with now. I mean, assistive tech is a market share that is only growing. If you look at companies like Microsoft, Google, Logitech that are embracing universal design, Apple that are embracing universal design and accessibility from the outset, from the very, very birth of a product, and seeing less redesign and seeing better usability overall. And it doesn't just have to be tech companies who can see disability and accessibility as a viable consumer product or part of the process of a business. It's just growing and growing exponentially.
Well, as you say, with 1.3 billion, I keep going back to this number. And as Steve was mentioning, the number of leaders across the FTSE 200. And, you know, statistically, we know there are many more people who are not disclosing. So there is a need out there. Now,
yeah, and there's an outdated figure. Oh, I'm sorry, Gian. I was just going to say there's an outdated figure that global disposable annual income is over 13 trillion with the disabled community and their family attachment. And that's a 2016 stat. So it's incredibly out. Again, back to needing stronger disability data, but just keep the 13 trillion figure in your mind.
Very true. And I think one thing I've got to say that's in my mind, we're talking about websites being inclusive in all ways. The flip side, and not to throw issues at us here today, but I saw a great company reached out to us recently. I was looking forward to having the call. I went on the website, I thought, wow, if I was ever going to work for a company, this would be the one I would work for. Fantastic website. I then spoke to them on the phone. I said, that website's amazing. They said, that's our issue. We've invested so much in the website, but the culture's not following the website. And so the other way of this was that they'd invested in the website in terms of attracting employees and the EVP and whatnot, but actually the culture internally didn't match. So they were attracting all the candidates and then they were leaving. And so I think, not to throw issues at everybody here today, but to your word of complexities, Crosby, today, you really do have to think about every stage of the employee journey here. Now, everybody, I am going to open this up to questions, and feel free whether you want to pop your question in the chat or you can use the hand up function at the bottom. And please don't be shy. We're a very nice group here today. All questions are welcome. And I embrace awkwardness as well, so that I can give it 10 seconds. That's totally fine for any questions coming in. Should we? Anybody? Because I could keep on going for hours here, so we must have a few. If not, I will continue.
Ian, while they come in, one of the things I'll touch upon that you said earlier, and Steve, I don't know if you found this too, you know, we've had companies who've spent quite a bit of money to bring sort of big name disability influencers or celebrities in-house. And what they find, what our companies find most powerful is the employee stories. When it's leaders and employees telling their truth and what it's like to work inside company A, B, or C, that's where change starts to happen more than any of the amount of money spent on it. External speakers are phenomenal and can create a moment and inspiration and innovation, but really it goes to creating an environment where employees can tell their own stories.
Mm.
That's right. I mean, I like I said before, I didn't have a choice, but equally, what happened when I had the accident, I was lying in Switzerland. in a bed in hospital in intensive care, and suddenly I was getting a lot of emails and text messages and WhatsApp messages and everything else, and my daughters were reading them to me, and they were incredibly powerful. But we'd done nothing more than announce to the city that you know, the CEO is down and the CFO will take over for a while, and you know, he's had a serious accident. And of course, the messages all said, "We know you, Steve. You'll get better. You'll be running on the Great Wall of China with us again. You'll be running in Centennial Park, in Central Park, you know, etc., etc." And of course, I thought, well, they really don't know the complexity of my accident, so I thought I owe it to them to be honest. And so I actually managed to get the nighttime carer to prop me up and put a decent shirt on, not like this one, and recorded a message to all of my staff and put it on the internal social media. And of course, when I talked about my children finding me in intensive care, unconscious obviously, and you know, yes, I cried. What is wrong with leaders not being themselves? If I didn't cry, talking about my daughters and the shock that must have created and the pain it must have caused to them, what sort of human being am I? And why would people want to work for me? And that is what leadership is about. I've always said to people, why do people want to work for you? You know, they don't have to. They can always phone Michael Page up, you know, that's no problem. So that's the reality. And so therefore the authenticity of just being honest about yourself throughout an organization is key to being inclusive.
It is, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because I'm completely with you there, Steve. We know that leaders who are willing to be open, call it vulnerable, share stories, be themselves, be human. I think everybody should know what it means to be a good human being. It shouldn't be this difficult, but it really, really seems to be this hard. Now, can I just ask a question to everybody? Because the questions come in and I'm going to answer that, Amber. Thanks for the question. And just, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but fingers on the buzzers in the chat box almost, because we keep mentioning there about like ERGs and them being important. Just a question, at your organization, do you have a disability focused ERG? Just a yes, no, or not sure. There's no judgment here. Just kind of get a bit of a vibe because we're all here to help each other. Who's going to kick us off with literally just a yes? Okay, Gail, thanks. Thanks, Beth, for being open. Just to get a feel so we can share the right practical tips. Okay, thanks, Esther, and Chris and Michelle. Okay, Marissa's going to find out this week. Like that, Marissa, we look forward to. Not yet, Otto. Okay, no, small organization. Okay, whilst those keep coming in, that's very helpful. There's a lot of no, not sure, not yet. And Amber, I'm going to come back to your question there, which was, again, do you have any top tips or must-dos for employee getting an ERG going? Now, I know we already touched upon getting an exec sponsor. Is there anything else that you would say, perhaps, Crosby, of how do you find the right people? If somebody's like, I want to start the ERG, let's break it down.
I mean, I would say start by steal shamelessly and apply it to your culture, because so many ERGs have been developed in other corporations, and there's so much of that information that is in the public sphere. You know, we mentioned Purple Space earlier, but if you think of companies like Google, Merck, GSK, the healthcare company, has done extensive work that they've released externally. So I think it's taking a look at frameworks that have already been put out there, who's done it well, and copying what will work inside your own corporation. And then I think it's about having a leadership communication on the why of all of this, and moving forward with a sort of a call to action around a disability ERG. My hope would be that there are other ERGs already formed, whether that be race, gender, LGBTQ inside of the organization, which you can build off of those for the framework of a disability ERG. But if you are starting from scratch, I think it's about spending some time researching what's already been done and finding the right partners to have these conversations with. It's not as hard as, it's an easy, hard thing to do, right? Like there's so much information, you can get this done, but it's about finding the right people internally to help you lead the charge.
Love that. And I think often it is just getting started. Take that first step towards doing it and move things forward. Now, whilst those are coming in, just if there's any other questions, again, please do to drop them in there, or you can kind of raise your hand as well. But one thing I will, Tamara, perhaps I can come to you from a BAB standpoint. Do you have any questions at all, perhaps, for the panelists?
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. And, you know, Steve kind of started to answer my question a little bit when he talked about, you know, just being human about his story to his staff and his team. I guess, you know, as someone, you know, without a physical disability, you know, how do you come through that and stay so positive and want to carry on and want to continue to lead? And, you know, I imagine it takes an incredible amount of emotional and mental strength to kind of absorb that and continue to get on with the work and you know, meet the numbers. And so I imagine there's a lot of interplay there, but just to kind of so quickly prioritize the organization and your people by sending that message. You know, I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but it weighs on me.
I think we're all made differently, aren't we? But you know, I see my role in life to be a good father and to be a good, in my case, leader and as well. And you know, I knew I was in the spotlight when I had my accident. I realized a lot of people, friends, my children, my mother, you know, etc., would be looking at me to see how I reacted. And yeah, there is an opportunity there, of course, to react negatively. And I'll sadly say this, that within spinal injuries, for example, and one of the charities that I'm on the board of supports people when they've just had a spinal injury. And the suicide rate of young men is 5 times worse than young men generally, which, as we all know, is a scary statistic anyway. And I also remember in my hospital here in the UK, one lady that had exactly the same injury as me, who chose not to come out of her room, let alone her bed, since her accident 2 years ago. I knew I was a role model to my kids, first and foremost, and one of them's landing tomorrow, so I can't wait to see her here in Nice. And, you know, I'm very lucky as well to be able to see all the things. My eldest daughter had a baby 3 weeks ago, so I'm granddad now. And, you know, these are the things I would have missed out on if things had gone wrong, and maybe I'd be missing out on them if I hadn't accepted that responsibility and to move the agenda forward as much as I can. So that's my mission in life, to try and help people with a disability. And I think, as Jan keeps saying, it's so important to tell these stories as much. And I could have run away from it, and then maybe the FTSE 200 would have lost a CEO that might have talked about disability. And so it is what it is. As I keep reminding myself, and I only have to look out the window, there's nothing like a cold beer on a hot day, and I'm still here to enjoy that. So why wouldn't I be happy?
Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, Steve. I think it is, I mean, talking about a whole nother conversation, just mindset and the intersection of mental health. And there's just so much here, as you say, those young guys who don't see light at the end of the tunnel, who are struggling, and the suicide rates are so high that, again, go back to those people who aren't disclosing within our organizations. Think about what's going on in their mind. How can we create the right environment? You never know what somebody is thinking. And that kind of takes me to the last question today before we wrap up. And thanks for the question that we've got in the chat that says, during our last internal survey, 20% of our employees declared having a disability. We don't know who they are, as the survey was anonymous. What tips could you share with us to encourage them to openly speak about it, because they want to create a better working environment for everyone? Brackets, hi from Page Group, Belgium, Steve.
Hi back.
Okay. Yeah.
Look, I mean, clearly everything there. I mean, the great thing is that people trusted the survey enough to get the 20% result in the first place. So they are probably moving in the right direction. Clearly, as we said before, voices are powerful. Leaders talking about their disability, if they're part of that 20%, would definitely help get those that actually became, if you like, outed themselves as disabled. I do believe in the process of reverse mentoring, again, so that leaders can talk openly about it, even if they don't have a disability, and remind people that they're safe, etc., etc. I think that's important. We also, in different regions, large countries, and globally, had shadow boards. So if we felt it was important enough to have a board, so there's an executive board that runs the company, there's regional boards for Europe, Americas, etc., etc., and then big country boards as well, Germany, France. Why wouldn't you have a shadow board that was more representative of the inclusion that you want, and you know, disability, LGBTQ, ethnicity, whatever it is, and let them as well guide you as a board, because maybe you don't know what you don't know, right? And so maybe that's another way of just unlocking it, if you like, with those that are actually leading the company at the top.
Incredibly powerful. Really, really important, as you say, just employee listening, because I feel like I meet many leaders who talk a good game, but actually the power of listening, which is half of communication, I think is so often overlooked. Now, I'm mindful of the time, and I do have a final question for you both before we wrap up here today. And Crosby, I'm going to come to you first, and then to Steve. Just short answer, really, of like, in your opinion, what does a fully accessible workplace of the future look like? Talk about complexity is answer that one in short, if you can.
For me, it's when corporations start to get greedy about disability by understanding the profit center that lives inside of it. I think so much will change when we start to understand the profit that lives here. So what that looks like to me is that everyone can be productive, because the tools, the environment, the digital, the built, the culture from the outset have a universal design thinking and an accessible design thinking built in. Websites are usable, software is usable, flexibility is a part of what is inherent in the workplace. I think it's not about a better future for disabled employees. It's about building a better future of work, and disabled employees are included in that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Steve, any thoughts of yours to add on any final remarks?
Yeah, difficult to add much to that, because I think that nailed it. But I do think as well flexibility, because and look, I don't like it when people say, oh, now that the world is flexible and working from home, oh gosh, that should unlock the disability thing, because many of us are quite happy to come into work. And you know, I was having a drink with a friend last night who said, oh, you know, we met at work. And I said, oh, so did I. And you know, and I think a lot of people do. And I would hate to think that the biggest competitor, Tinder, has just disappeared. I still think people should go to the workplace, and I think people who are disabled should go to the workplace, not every day, etc., etc. But flexibility is key to being inclusive. You know, it takes me a lot longer to get up in the morning. Yes, you can put a 7 o'clock interview in my diary if you like, but it will mean I'm up at 4. And you know, just some appreciation of that flexibility is really important to be inclusive with disability.
Thank you. No, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm just mindful of the time, but I have been collating the top kind of 10 thoughts that I've got that you shared today. So I have to finish off with these before I hand back to Tamara, because a few points just for everyone. One, you mentioned whenever reviewing our offices, ensure you're removing barriers, and there are companies to guide us on this. 2, remember that number, 1.3 billion people around the world, huge talent pool there. 3, I've got, you know, there's a human reason, but also the economic reason, of course. Human will always come first, but don't forget that. 4, the indices can be helpful to start that senior leader conversation. We've also got the power of Purple Space to help you with the ERGs. Don't forget that reverse mentoring is very powerful, and shadow boards you mentioned too, Steve. Disclosing, of course, is difficult, but ultimately you have to think, would I want to work for a company that didn't allow me to disclose anyway? Final one from Steve there, flexibility is key. And there at the end, that Crosby's mentioned throughout, disability, we need to see it as a strength and a real value add. The final point, why we're even here today, is because if we can do this and take these steps forward, we can, back to the title of today, just really start embracing disability and start empowering others. So for me, it's a huge thank you. A thank you, Crosby. Thank you so much, Steve, for your insights. And I'm going to hand back to Tamara to close out today's session.
Just let me add another thank you to Crosby and Steve. Really just so grateful for your time. And again, to you, that was brilliantly moderated. Top 10, you were fantastic. Thank you so much. On behalf of all of our members, thank you for this. you know, we share this recording out with our members as well. So it has some legs behind it. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. This is part of our STIR series. More to come in the coming weeks and months. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.